Kia ora koutou, good evening everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We are taking a sidebar from the usual Meet the Candidates series to talk about the latest policy proposal in New Zealand politics. And it has brought a whole new term into the political conversation this year. So I'm very excited to be joined tonight by Mathew Pottinger, who is our UBI and tax spokesperson. Hey Matt.
Hey Shai, how's things up in Auckland?
Good. Oh, it's actually freezing. I'm literally sitting here with a blanket over my legs. So yeah, that's how it is up here. It was a very nice weekend, everyone. I got to have Matt stay up here in Auckland with me in my house, and we were actually so frantically busy that we had these ideas to do videos for you guys and just completely ran out of time. So maybe we'll make up for it by doing this live, hopefully. Now, please, everyone, if there are any tech issues, please forgive us. Our usual social media person is away at the moment, and so we have Adam stepping in. So thank you, Adam, for joining us tonight. So just put in the comments if there are any issues that we need to address. So please just bear with us. Thank you for your patience. Now, if you have been following TOP for a while, you'll be aware that one of our main policies going into the 2020 election is for a UBI, a universal basic income. So it's $250 a week for every adult, no questions asked. And we just want to give everyone the freedom to pursue their goals, to retrain, to start a new business, to have more time at home, whatever that extra financial safety net provides you. And it's been trialled overseas and it works in many different measures, and we will kind of go through some of the detail of that tonight. And Mathew's going to be here to talk us through some of the key areas that you guys might be interested in. So put in any questions of anything in particular that you want us to cover. And so maybe we just jump straight into Mathew telling us a little bit more about TOP's UBI policy.
That seems like a good place to start. So TOP's UBI policy is $250 a week for everyone aged 18 to 65. Of course, those over 65 already have New Zealand superannuation. And we will have also a child UBI of $40 a week, which is $2,080 a year, tax-free for children, and that's anybody under 18.
Okay, so that just sounds like a bunch of free money, Mathew.
Well, it's not free money. It's the same money we already have. We don't have to print money. We don't have to borrow money because it's fully costed and tax neutral. It's just redistributing it in a different way to the way that it occurs now.
And we'll probably come back to some of the detail of our UBI policy later on. But I guess that's kind of a good starting point to give people an insight into the UBI, and we can go through the why in a little bit. So the Greens have proposed a GMI, a guaranteed minimum income. What is that?
Yeah, so maybe this is a good place to start saying that with the policy that the Greens released on Sunday is really, there's a lot of great things about it, particularly, when you compare it to what Labor or National have got on the table for us. This policy has some really good points to it. And so although we might be picking aspects of it apart, it's just to make sure that everybody's educated about the differences between the two policy offerings. So the Greens announced on Sunday a guaranteed minimum income, a GMI. Now, it probably pays to say from the outset this is different, quite different from a UBI, even though they've got 3 letters and it's an acronym. So GMI is, in the case of the Greens, saying a minimum income for everybody of $325 a week. So that's about $17,000 a week. The thing, though, about a year. The thing, though, about a GMI is that if you earn less than $17,000, you'll be topped up to $17,000. If you earn more than that, you won't be topped up at all. So it's a bit different from UBI in the way that, although in many cases it's unconditional. It's very much conditional on how much you earn.
Okay, so with the UBI, everybody gets it, no questions asked. Every single adult 18 to 65, doesn't matter how many hours you work or don't work, or there's no conditions at all, you get that 250.
Yep.
And with the GMI, it only tops you up to that level.
Yes.
Up to that $17,000 a year level.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people won't be affected by that aspect of their policy.
Yeah, so the thing about a GMI compared to a UBI, one of the main things is that it extends the welfare trap. So it probably pays now for us to sort of talk about what a welfare trap is. So there's a welfare trap in our current benefit system. We've got a chart here that shows the job seeker, if you're single and 25 years or over. And what this is showing, this chart here, is we can call it the incentive to earn, or said another way, if you're earning minimum wage, how much money do you actually keep from working that hour? So you can see with the current benefit system, you're keeping a good chunk of the money, around about $17 there, it looks like, up until you've done 5 hours of work. Then all of a sudden, the benefit gets abated away. Now, this is like having really high effective tax rates. It means that when you work that hour, you end up only keeping about $4 worth of it. So you're getting paid about $18 and $18.90 an hour, but you're only keeping $4 of it. Now, you'll be in this welfare trap where you're trying to get ahead, you're working more hours, but you're not really seeing the benefits of it. Right up into 25 hours of work. So we can move on now to have a look at the welfare trap for the Greens GMI. So if you can see it now, the welfare trap starts a bit later. Now this is good. This is a good thing. So this is because in the current benefit system, you can earn up to $19 a week before your benefit starts being abated away. Okay, much like climbing up a sand dune, and you're trying to make progress, but it's all the sand slipping underneath you, and you actually aren't making any progress at all. So with Greens GMI, that doesn't actually start happening for you until around 10 hours of work if you're on minimum wage. The problem here, though, is that it just simply kicks the can down the road. Okay, so it extends the welfare trap out all the way up to 36 hours. So there's a real dead space between working 10 hours a week at minimum wage and 36 hours a week at minimum wage, where you're basically taking home $3.30 an hour. So the final point that we'll have here on the welfare trap is we can see TOP's proposal here. So with the UBI, there is no abatement, or at least there's no abatement on the first $250 a week, because with the UBI, you get that, you keep that, there's no questions asked. You do what you want with it. And this means that any abatement that occurs will only occur on the top up that we have above and beyond the UBI level. So just to refresh people, with TOP's UBI proposal, if you currently receive, let's say, $300 a week in government transfers and benefit, the first 250 will be a UBI, and you'll be topped up $50 a week. Now that $50 is what will be abated away, but because it's such a small amount and because we have a flat tax, we can have it so you always keep at least 50 cents in the dollar. You can see here with TOP's UBI proposal that it just has a flat line the whole way through. The incentive to earn is the same whether you're working 1 hour a week or right up to 70 hours a week. It fills in that welfare trap and gets rid of it. Or in the case of if your benefit is more than 250, it turns into a very small hole.
Thanks, Nat. Those are really helpful graphs. Thanks for pulling those up as well, Kane. So effectively, if I was to summarize, our current system basically disincentivizes people between those certain specific hours to work, because you're no better off at all whether you're working 10 hours or up towards the 25-hour, mark.
Yeah.
And the difference of the Greens policy is that you're no better off between the 10 hours and the 36 hours.
Correct. So this
That's
equates...
worse, isn't it?
Oh, it is worse. It's the trade-off. So that's the thing about UBI. And there's no perfect benefit system. It's just a set of trade-offs. And with Green's proposal, there's this welfare trap extends from $10,000 a year to somebody working and earning up to $35,000 a year. So, I mean, the benefits here are that somebody on the benefit will have, at least $325 a week. But the hidden cost, so to speak, of this is that it's hard to get off the benefit, or any work is punished. That's really the big thing here, is that you're punished if and when you work.
Okay. So if we support helping those who are the poorest in our society, you're going to really like this Green policy. You're going to be really happy that those who are our poorest are going to have more money in their pocket each week compared to right now. The difficulty that we have, though, is that they're going to find it even more difficult to move out of reliance on this welfare support and into employment, because they have to work so many more hours per week than they do now to make it worth their while to move away from welfare and into paid employment. And for so many people, is what I'm picking up here, is for so many people, it's a really difficult leap, because it's not even taking into account the difficulties for parents, for example, who then have to pay childcare on top of this. So it is really difficult for some who currently might be working 10 hours a week and taking home the support with the Greens policy. And it would be very difficult for them to then have to work for 36 hours and it not even basically make any financial difference to them.
Yeah, so, if we compare it to the current system as well, we've got working for families and student allowance are some of the ones with the highest abatement rates. We call them clawbacks, is another word for it. So you end up paying 100% tax rate. You earn $1 and you pay it all back. So that's the thing too about these charts, is we've picked the job seeker and we've picked the Greens GMI with no top-ups. But if you start adding working for families, or at least the reformed working for families that the Greens have proposed, these traps can extend quite far out. And in many ways, it kind of drives a wedge between two sets of people, those who are poor and those who aren't as poor. It's difficult to transition between the two, because there's a very much this gap. Visually we can see it there, a big trap that separates how much you can earn if you're being topped up by the GMI and how much you can earn once you're over the other side of that trap.
So what impact would you say, or how would you compare the impact for people who are our working poor, our families who have to work multiple jobs currently to cover their rent, to cover their bills, to cover their food? How would you compare these two options of support for those families?
Yeah, well, without a doubt, the UBI is better for the working poor. Because the thing to keep in mind with this is that with part-time work can be, particularly with the gig economy, it's a big part of this, and long gone are the days where you're working 40 hours a week. So if we're all working 40 hours a week, we wouldn't see this welfare trap. But that's just not the reality of the world we're living in. We've got uncertain hours, we've got part-time workers, and you may as well, and the thing about the Greens GMI is that it might incentivize people to not take on more than 10 hours of work a week, even though, working more would earn them more money in a normal system, because we've got this welfare trap and they're only earning $3.30 an hour. It's really not worth the effort, and therefore it's very difficult to increase your incomes.
And so just based on your comment there then, Matt, what is the impact then of GMI on businesses who might be looking to either employ more people or have their current employees, let's say, who might be on a 15-hour-a-week contract, and then this small business is growing, and so they're keen to take on extra hours or give extra hours to their staff that they already have? What do you think, would there be any impact of this type of a GMI policy in that situation?
Yes, and that's the sad thing. So, with COVID, we've got a lot of businesses who might want to be growing, but certainly not at the rate where they want to take the risk of employing somebody full time. They want to be able to hire somebody for 20 hours a week, let's say. But that's going to be hard to convince somebody to work 20 hours a week, where when we've seen with these charts, they're not that much better off than if they were working 10 hours a week. We see it with the current system too, where an employee might be asked to work more hours to cover a shift, and they'll say no. And I mean, fair enough, because they won't be better off financially for having done that. And that's the issue with the welfare trap.
Because it's just not financially worth it for them to take on more hours if they're literally not going to have any more money in their pocket for doing those extra hours. It just doesn't make sense that they would. I don't think any of us, to be fair, would want to work any hours for free.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's
unless
lots.
You're a volunteer.
There's lots to say about people work for more than just financial incentives. Okay, and that's completely true. But the issue here that we have in New Zealand with the high cost of living is, for a lot of people, it's not really a choice. We are working because we need more money to pay for our rents, which are increasing year on year. So, it would be great if we lived in a society where we worked for other reasons solely than financial. But I would say for a lot of Kiwis who are living paycheck to paycheck, whilst, yes, there's great things about working, being paid for it is one of them.
And so, just leading on from that then, what would the impact of a GMI have on the living wage or minimum wage? How would that kind of play into this?
So this is a real interesting one where the UBI shines. So within Green's policy, they're committed to increasing the minimum wage. I can't recall the specifics, but just generally continuing the progress that they've been making, or Labor, in terms of increasing the minimum wage over the next couple of years. And so here at TOP, we want people to be earning at least the living wage. That's the goal. So really it's about, well, how do we achieve that? And the UBI and the GMI provide two really great examples of the different ways you could achieve that and the trade-offs with them. So with a UBI, TOP's UBI, suddenly everybody would be finding themselves earning at least the living wage. And now that's because, of course, you're earning the minimum wage, and the UBI tops up somebody on the minimum wage by about $6,200 a year. So it means overnight, with TOP's UBI policy of $250 a week, everybody in the country, all the essential workers, are earning living wage. Now, the key thing here, as I'll show shortly, is that took place without putting any burden on our businesses, which are struggling at this time in particular. With the minimum wage and the Greens' approach to it, that I think the minimum wage will get to the point where it is equal to the living wage, but it won't happen overnight. It will happen over a number of years, I can only assume. Meanwhile, the living wage itself has probably increased during that time as rents have gone higher and higher, as they do. Here in Nelson, rents went up 9.8% in the last year. And then the big thing is that increase in minimum wage puts extra burden on our businesses, because it's our businesses who have to pay for that increased minimum wage. So that's one of the key things here, one of the key takeaways, is we've got a choice between bringing people up on the living wage overnight without burdening our businesses, And with Greens policy, we've got potentially reaching the living wage at some point in the future, but our businesses would be burdened with that cost.
So we could achieve two birds, one stone with the UBI, basically, is what I'm hearing.
We could.
It's more of a question under the GMI policy as to when they would get to a point that it catches up with the living wage. Of course, taking into account, as you said, Matt, the biggest driver of the living wage going up is housing costs. And we might want to get to this later on in our chat tonight, but unless we address the cost of housing and the root cause of what's driving housing costs up, living wages are never going to stop rising.
Yeah, absolutely correct.
So I know there are other aspects to this new Greens policy, and I'd kind of be keen to move on to that soon because I think we're going to get a few questions coming through just shortly. I'm just looking at the time. So tell me a little bit now about the Greens proposing higher income taxes.
Yeah, so we've got a progressive tax system that's made up of a whole heap of different tax brackets. We've got about 3 lower tax brackets and 1 higher one at 33%. And the Greens are chucking a couple more at the top end. One at $100,000 and one at $150,000. I think 37% and 42%. It's getting quite up there.
Did you say 42?
42%. I mean, don't quote me on that, but that's what I believe it is. Maybe somebody in the comments can confirm that that's the case. So the justification the Greens have on this one is that 42% isn't all that high, or at least it's in line with some European countries in terms of their top tax brackets. But the key thing to keep in mind here in New Zealand is we've got a bit of we went the broad base approach with a low tax rate. So we tax everything, but at a low rate. Whereas some of the approach in Scandinavia is to tax a few things at a high rate. So for the 2 extra tax brackets that the Greens have put on our progressive tax system, it makes it a bit more complicated. So that's probably worth saying here. They've simplified the benefit system to an extent, but kind of pushed some of that complexity over to the tax system. For those who are wage and salary earners, who we know, if you follow TOP, are already paying more than their fair share of tax, they won't be able probably to escape those higher tax brackets. But those who have investment income or some other outside wage and salary, they'll be able to funnel their money in a different place to just escape those higher tax brackets.
And so is that connected then to the general wealth tax policy or aspect of this policy?
Well, that is a separate thing, and we can probably move on to that now. So the wealth tax that the Greens have. The wealth tax and the 2 top tax brackets are how they're paying for the GMI. And so it's probably worth mentioning TOP's approach here on how we're paying for our UBI. And so we're paying for our UBI in a few different ways. One, on savings, on administration, because our tax and welfare system is modern, simple, and fair. It's simply a 33% flat tax, 33% on everything in every single direction, nice and simple, none of this complicated tax brackets, because it's actually the tax brackets themselves that add a lot of complexity to our tax system. It's the fact that, you have $1 and you don't know how much tax you should pay on it. That's where the complexity comes in, and that's why we've got accountants, basically, at the end of the day. We save $800 million there. I'm
just going to pause you, Matt, because I know that there might be people hearing this for the first time, and I know a lot of people flinch when you hear flat tax, because a lot of people hear flat tax and it does not sound progressive, and I can understand that completely. And the thing is that TOP's flat tax is not in isolation. It's a flat tax plus UBI. And the combination makes sure that we still have a very progressive tax system, where those at the bottom are still, like Mathew said before, our lowest income earners are going to be $6,000, just over $6,000 better off cash in hand every year. And the benefit, there's still a slight income benefit to those of the highest incomes, but it is at a lesser level. So it's still very progressive. Sorry, I just wanted to jump in there because I can just imagine that people hear that flash word and people have their ideas about how it often can work.
Yeah, I wondered about calling it a uniform tax. So that I think it might have a better ring to it, not so harsh, but it's the same thing. So we pay for our UBI with a flat tax, and also we pay it with a property tax. This basically, in a roundabout way, gets our UBI up from $9,000 a year up to $13,000 a year, which of course is $250 a week. So our property tax is pretty cool, and it's pretty. It's solving a specific job of plugging a hole in our tax system around property. This hole in our tax system, specifically, around property, but in a large part owner-occupied property, has played a large role in our house prices and rents growing faster than incomes for the last 30 years. So TOP's tax reform there, our property tax, involves plugging that hole, and that helps us keep house prices flat for a generation. Compare this to Green's wealth tax. So you might think it's quite similar, but I think it's not as similar as you might believe it to be. The thing about Green's wealth tax is that it's indiscriminate. It taxes everything. It taxes wealth. You could almost call it an envy tax, because it doesn't matter how that wealth was generated, whether that wealth has sort of paid its fair share of tax over the years. The wealth tax applies. So what it is
so it's not confined to property.
Not at all. And we'll come to why that's an issue very soon. So the tax itself is taxing all wealth above $1 million at 1% and all wealth above $2 million at 2%. So it's just we won't make the same mistake as Paul Goldsmith. It's just the amount above 1 million that will be taxed at the 1%. So you'll need to add up how much you've got in your KiwiSaver, how much your artwork is worth, how much your car is worth. Anything above $50,000 is included in figuring out what your wealth is. So it's done on equity, like TOP's property tax. So if your house is worth $1 million, but you've got a $500,000 mortgage, it'll just be the $500,000 that's considered the wealth.
And so where does the money come from for all the administration costs of figuring out how much your boat costs, how much your artwork costs, how much your racing horse costs?
I'm not too sure. I'm sure it'll be in the costing. It's certainly it will add administration costs in comparison for TOP's general vibe, which is trying to make this whole tax and welfare system integrated and simple.
And even ignoring TOP for a second, not that I ever want to do that, but just compared to the current system where it's already very expensive and incredibly bureaucratic. And so adding that dimension where you have to take into account indiscriminate wealth, as you said, which can be literally artwork and boats and who knows what else, that sounds like a lot of administration to figure out a person's wealth.
So the big thing, I think the biggest weakness, the biggest sort of side effect that we see with this wealth tax is that it doesn't actually address the hole in our tax system. It doesn't address the differential between other investments like shares, term deposits, and businesses, and the tax that's paid on property. What it does is, because it's indiscriminate and it taxes all wealth, it just taxes both sets and raises them up. It doesn't actually address this differential here. And as I mentioned before, it's that differential, which means we're all incentivized to put all our money into property speculation effectively. So the real issue is that okay, we're taxing the wealth of productive businesses. We're taxing it so much that property will become the only thing that does give you a return.
Hang on, just pause a second.
Mhm.
Are you saying that it's going to get worse? The differential between incentivizing people to invest in businesses and other types of investment compared to housing is only going to get worse with this tax, with the indiscriminate wealth tax. Literally
Yes.
the opposite of what we need to do, get housing under control.
Yes, there's a good chance that will happen. And the strange thing, I think, is that, I mean, I wouldn't have minded if the Greens had proposed this wealth tax and said, hey, look, we're just wanting to generate some money so that we can pay for the GMI. That would be fine. But in all their articles that I've read since the policy was released, they've been talking about this wealth tax increasing the incentives to invest in productive businesses. They've been saying, hey, look, we've been buying and selling houses off each other for years. This wealth tax will address that issue and mean that we start using, pouring our capital into into the productive economy, R&D and jobs, creating in businesses, creating higher paying jobs, raising a standard of living, that sort of stuff. Whereas, as I just mentioned, that's not what this wealth tax does. It does nothing to address the differential in our tax system.
So should I just quickly pull up, because I can see Kane has found the really handy graph, just to explain what we mean by tax differential when we're talking about the tax on housing compared to other types of investments. And is that in front of you guys now, hopefully? Okay, cool. So you guys can see that the very short, tiny bar to here, which says owner-occupied housing, is incredibly tiny compared to everything else. You do not need to be an economist to be able to see the huge difference there. And it's that huge difference that drives everybody into the thing that is the least taxed. So what Matthew's explaining to us is that differential is not going to be addressed. So there's not going to be any counter approach here that's going to even out those graphs so that people don't need to follow what the system tells them and shovel their money into housing and can actually invest in productive assets, productive investments. Anything else on that graph there, Matthew?
No, I think you said it well. I mean, the GMI UBI debate is a bit more balanced, just in terms of, I'm a big fan of the unconditionality of a UBI, the fact that it removes the welfare trap. But there are certainly things to be said about a GMI. It's a bit of a trade-off. When it comes to the wealth tax, it's a much clearer picture of which one we want to see in this country. And I can tell you now that I'd rather have a tops property tax which is actually going to achieve something and is very specific on what it wants to achieve, holding house prices flat so our wages can catch up and houses can be affordable once again, as opposed to some sort of envy tax, wealth tax that's just saying, hey, look, you're rich, I'm going to tax you for that.
And that's really the only outcome that we would see there, right? Because it's not going to make housing more affordable. It's just going to make the rich pay.
And it's going to make it a bit difficult to increase your wealth beyond $1 million and $2 million. Now, you might not be too concerned at that point, but it is, wealth generates wealth in a lot of cases. And this is the sort of thing that we need our most wealthy people to invest in productive assets. So we have more opportunities, so our children have a future where we've got fun, exciting, high-paying jobs to do, and we're not going to do that if we are if we're indiscriminately taxing wealth.
And I mean, we haven't even got, and you kind of touched on it there, and we haven't even covered yet the gig economy and the future of jobs, with automation and AI taking over and people needing to constantly retrain and be in and out of work, and the flexibility that a UBI offers, because you always have this base level of financial support no matter what stage of the retraining in and out of work phase you're in. Whereas it seems from these graphs and from how you've explained it that this GMI doesn't really help us with a more flexible welfare system in terms of speed, in terms of its adaptability to people's ever-changing circumstances.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say, particularly, when you're in that welfare trap. We also don't have a fully clear understanding of how this GMI can kind of work in real time. That's the real issue here too with the UBI, $250 in your bank account, everybody's bank account, done, dusted. GMI, if it's anything like working for families, that thing, you've got to estimate ahead of time how much money you're going to earn. Now that's fine again if this is the 1960s and you're working 40 hours a week. But that's not what we live in this modern age. A lot of people don't know how many hours they're going to be working until they've worked those hours, and then they might have been given too much GMI, so then they've got to pay it back. This is how our working for families system works. If you've got a business like mine, where it's a hardware business and you don't know when you're going to make a sale until somebody buys something, your income can fluctuate quite a bit and you can't really predict ahead of time how well you're going to do. So you end up being in this position where you may have had too much working for families, you've got to pay it back, you're being charged interest on having been paid too much working for families in the first place. It's just hideous, and we can do away with it all with the UBI.
Mm. And so has this GMI addressed the need to individualise financial support?
It certainly has made it more individualised in the current system. So that's a real great plus here. There are still lots of conditionality on this. So Marama Davidson gave a good example where, because she gets paid quite well as an MP, as a Member of Parliament, her husband wouldn't be eligible for the GMI. Again, so that's not quite individualised as we'd hope it would be. Also, you get paid an extra $30 a week if you live by yourself. So they still need to know these, they need to know these things about your living circumstances, who you're living with, not to the same extent as the current system. And that's a great step forward, but it doesn't do away with it completely.
Okay. So they will still need to have that information about effectively your relationship status to some extent.
To some extent, yes.
And is there kind of an explanation as to why that might be?
I mean, the justification is the justification for all these things is to say, well, okay, somebody living alone has higher costs because they can't share the power bill. So they need an extra $30. And that's a fine justification, but it kind of works two ways. In one way, you're also incentivized to live alone. And this is probably taking it a bit far, but we saw with the Helen Clark Foundation that loneliness, that the way to address loneliness was to give people income. And that's a fantastic idea. And so we sort of thought, well, okay, UBI, but no, for whatever reason, the Helen Clark Foundation said specifically a GMI. So a GMI would, of course, based on their research, improve loneliness. So it's a bit strange that you get paid an extra $30 if you end up living alone. It seems a bit counterintuitive.
Yeah, very counterintuitive. Okay, well, I'm just looking at the time, and I understand there's a few questions that have come through. So we're going to start taking your questions, and if you've got any more, sorry, Kane's just getting them together. So I also just want to say in advance, because I've just seen the time, and we have talked for longer than I intended. So if we don't get to your question tonight, I'm really sorry, and we will come back to you in the comments tomorrow. So just sorry in advance if we don't get to that. And thanks, Kane. I can just read that one out if that's the one that you're going to pull up. Cool. So there is a question here. Would your plan include rent to buy for people in social housing? Sorry, Kane, I've just picked that one.
Well, we could answer that. May not. So that's about housing, isn't it? Not that I'm aware of. Well, it's certainly not a big aspect of our housing policy, rent to buy.
I think they must be referring to Green's old policy, right? I assumed.
Well, that wasn't in the Greens policy that got released on Sunday.
Okay, sorry.
Our questions about housing.
Shai goes rogue.
Here we go.
Okay, thanks for bearing with us. All right. What's the opportunity cost of the UBI? Where does the money come from, and what's the cost of that?
Okay, opportunity cost. Interesting. I think what's being said here is like, well, if we pay for the UBI, what aren't we paying for? And that's the beauty of having a fully costed tax neutral UBI proposal, is that, you know, we're not diverting funds. What we're doing is we're doing a bit of a tax switch. I like to call it trading in your 3 lower tax brackets for a payment of $250 a week, trading in the capital gains on your house for $250 a week, and trading in the bureaucracy that you have to deal with every day, whether it's working for families, WINS, or student allowance, trading in that bureaucracy for a payment of $250 a week. I don't know. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. I mean, I think we also need to kind of take a sidestep and just say, look, our current system is not working. And we have a real chance here to try something that has been shown to work in a number of different areas overseas. And we need a system that is going to be simple and modern and fair. And we're just not getting that with the current system.
Yeah, and you know, it's easy to be scared of the amount of money that it sounds like a UBI would cost, but we've been very specific by, you know, switching to a flat tax of 33% and having a property tax which taxes that equity. Well, it says the equity in any property that you own should be paying as much tax as if that money was in a bank deposit. And with both those things, we can have a UBI of $13,000 for everybody. So it's really just tax reform at the end of the day.
But don't say that, Matt. Tax is so boring and no one is interested. And that's just the reality.
That's sometimes when I introduce myself, I have to say I'm the UBI spokesperson rather than the UBI and tax spokesperson.
Exactly.
Otherwise they roll their eyes at me.
We left that out. Okay, next question is from Daniel. UBI skeptics are concerned about macroeconomic impacts such as inflation. Can you explain what this is and how TOP's policy addresses it?
Yeah, so if we just generally looking at inflation, the key thing to remember first and foremost is we're not printing money, we're not borrowing money. It's the same money just being rebranded, so to speak. A lot of people already receive $250 a week, and that's just being rebranded as the UBI. And then, of course, with taxing property, it's much the same thing. Again, we're not printing money, we're not borrowing money. Now, there's also the aspect too of whether or not, for example, rents will increase, because that's the one where there's a lot of tight pressure there in terms of, you know, the supply not quite meeting the demand. There is a small amount of risk that rents may slightly increase, but this in any normal circumstance. The thing too is that, of course, the UBI is funded by a property tax, and this property tax is very specific because it looks to free up the supply in the rental market and put downward pressure on rents. So you've got a couple of things competing against each other. You've also got the fact that not everybody actually ends up with $250 in their bank account. The way that this all works is, yes, everybody gets $250, but there's a transaction that takes place for people, depending on how much you earn, whether or not you own property, you'll be paying some or all of that back in tax. So not everybody will have an extra $250 a week to throw at rents increasing.
Okay. Good one, Matthew. That's nice. I think you summed that up. I'm just going to keep going because I know there's quite a lot of questions. So sorry, we won't spend a lot of time on each one. Tim, it's all good informing us about the policies. How do we get this information into the mainstream media? Can I just quickly rant about this? Because it's a great question, Tim. And classic example is that Greens have just come out with this policy, right? It's really detailed, it's really thorough, and it's really important that people understand it so that they actually know what their options are. And what does the mainstream media focus on this week? They focus on some stupid spat between maybe Golriz and maybe Rose Matafeo. Who cares? And if I was Greens, I'd be mega pissed that is what the media has focused on instead of actually trying to bother to read this policy and understand it and digest it. And I know how they feel now. So it's bullshit. So thank you, Tim. And I'm sorry for ranting, but this is just really a pressure point for me today. And it's for everyone to stop clicking on those bullshit clickbait links and stand up and demand that media focus on policies and important information rather than crappy little gossipy rag things. Anyway, that's my rant. Sorry, Matthew. You probably have a much more measured answer to this.
Okay, if you want to hear my... Yeah, you want to... here's my measured answer. So we've got a UBI event in Auckland next week, do we not, Shai?
We do.
Maybe this will be a good thing for people to invite the mainstream media along to, right? So we've already got some guests announcers coming along. We won't give away the surprise, I don't think, but...
No.
What, next Thursday, is it?
Yes. The 9th.
The 9th, the Grey Lynn.
The 9th?
Yep. So head along to that, and look, for the next 6 days, just email your favourite mainstream media and tell them about the event, and tell them we're going to have a whole range of speakers from across the political spectrum talking about why they support a UBI.
So that is hopefully an opportunity for the mainstream media to prove me wrong. Basically. Okay. I'll keep going with the questions. Right. How many people are in the part-time situation unwilling to pick up more hours due to the welfare trap?
Yeah, so we've got a good example here is students. So their student allowance gets abated away at $220 a week, I believe, and that is $1 for dollar. So that's 100%. You work, you don't get to keep any of it again because you're climbing this sand dune that's falling away from you. So that means I think students are working up to 10 hours a week, but it's just not worth working any more than that. So, the welfare trap's a real thing, is as abstract as the concept is so abstract, it's sort of hard to wrap your head around. And those charts kind of help. But it just shows that what we don't really want to be doing is making that welfare trap worse. Who else?
And right, I don't know how many people are currently part-time employees in that exact situation, but there are a growing number of people in casual work because of a number of small businesses, kind of what Matthew said earlier on this evening, that there are a lot of businesses not wanting to take on full-time employees, but they might be able to take on a growing number of hours. And so that is the situation that we're going to see more and more of as we see how COVID evolves, well, the economic chapter of COVID. Okay, cool. Next question is from Elan. I'm sorry if I pronounce that wrong. Are you aligning with the Green Party with this policy?
Well, to be fair, we came out with the policy first, but any which way, thumbs up to the Greens, as we said from the outset, for actually putting forth some really progressive policy. The thing that strikes me, though, is that there was the chance for them, when they were tossing up between GMI and UBI, to pick what we'd consider the more superior option, the UBI. And they didn't. That's fine. So then it comes across to the sort of, well, how are you going to pay for it? Well, you've got a risk-free rate of return method that plugs the hole in the tax system around property, and then you've got a wealth tax. And again, they picked the inferior option of the two. So I think the thing about the Greens policy is it's really made clear that, there's always been differences between the two parties, but this has made it very clear the differences that separate us.
That's the thing. So a UBI and a GMI are very different and achieve very different outcomes. So we're not aligned on this, except for the fact that they are both policies to try and move us at least forward from status quo. Okay. Cool. Next question is from Evan. Will TOP work with either of the big two, National or Labour? Yes. Most definitely, yes. We will work with anyone if it means we're going to be able to actually get our progressive policies through. Yeah, that's basically the answer. Okay. Sorry, Kate, that was probably too quick. You need more time. That was very quick. Look, I guess the thing is with that, and I will just slightly digress because I know there might be some chatter in the comments on this. A lot of people who hear a centrist party, like TOP, people often say TOP your centrist, and I'm not going to go into the detail of that, but it doesn't mean you water stuff down. It means you'll work with whoever you need to get progressive policies through. That's what it means for TOP. Okay. Moving on. Jesse, how will it affect people on median wage, $25.50 per hour, people who have trained in a certain industry and worked their way up? Will they earn the same as someone new who has just started?
This is an interesting question. They won't earn the same. Well, they'll have to work. So the thing about median wage is that we saw before with the charts that for the Greens GMI, the abatement kicks in at 10 hours. So you can work 10 hours and you're keeping most of your payment there before you start hitting the 82% marginal effective tax rates. With medium wage, it goes down to 7 hours. So, the abatements start to kick in about 7 hours and they last until about 26 hours. So there's still, even for median wage, is still a sizable welfare trap. And we hope to actually put a few more charts together for a few different examples, different scenarios, people with children, not with children, to illustrate the size of these welfare traps. But to answer your question specifically, Jesse, they won't earn the same, but of course if they're working only a few hours a week, they will have the same money because the GMI will top them up to that amount, if that makes sense.
It does. Thanks, Matt. Also on that, not directly related, but I always need to plug this. So go in, hopefully our main page can put in the link to our UBI calculator because that might also help you to see the practical impact of UBI in your life. Cool. Next question is from Jesse. How do you convince National to adopt this policy if you were to form a government with them? Actually, Matthew, I know you have the perfect answer for this, so do you want to just jump in there?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. People think that, a UBI is something that only Labour might ever talk about. But look, National are just as keen for something like this. Now, there are different reasons, because that's the thing. That's one of the beauties of a UBI, is that people across the political spectrum love it, and for different reasons, of course. But we've got a few. Rather than calling it a UBI, if National were going to use it, we'd call it a dividend. Okay, so it's a payment to everybody, almost like you're a shareholder. We have this thing in Nelson where the power companies pay out about $100 a year to every person who lives in Nelson, just as a sort of a return on investment or return on capital, more specifically. And the fact that we can get rid of the welfare trap is something that National would be pretty keen on, I would have imagined. So there's lots of reasons that National would would want to take it on board. Not in one in particular too is that they've got a lot of concerns about us, about the differential in the tax system at least, and there's a few different ways to address that. And I know for one that National are very keen for the country to invest in more productive assets.
So what Matthew's saying is that one of the greatest benefits of the UBI is that it is a real incentive to work, because people know no matter what, you have this basic level of $250 per week, and none of that is going to be taken off you regardless of how many hours you work in any given week. They're not going to be scared in 1 week to work 20 hours and the next week in 40 hours, because it doesn't matter. No matter what, you will keep your basic level of support. So that is good for businesses. They're going to find it easier to get employees who are going to be willing to work those extra hours. So tick for business. And in terms of the other point that Matthew said, in terms of the tax differential that we've talked about a bit tonight, we want to encourage investment in productive assets, that is, conduct productive investments. That is how we grow our economy. We do not grow our economy by buying and selling houses from each other. It is nothing more than a pyramid scheme. So the outcome of actually having proper investments that will improve and grow our economy is exactly aligned with National. As Matthew said, sorry, you go.
Oh, I'm just going to be talking about simplification of the tax system. The efficiencies, the $800 million a year we spend pushing paper around, okay? The fact that we can have a flat tax that gets rid of all that bureaucracy is a big sell, I would have thought, for a party like National.
Yeah, that, Jesse, truly is the greatest thing about this UBI. It's probably as apolitical as a policy can be. It is supported by the left, it is supported by the right, because it just makes sense. Okay, next question. And I'll just take, this is the last question because we're just about on an hour. So very last question for the night. Okay, good. Pat, the living wage is $21.15 per hour and gives someone $715 a week take-home pay working a 40-hour week. With your UBI policy, I only need to earn $17.35 an hour for the same. Do you plan to cut the minimum wage? No, we do not.
Yeah, it's a really good point to bring out here, though, Pat. So we have no plans to cut the minimum wage. And so hence why, with the minimum wage where it is, $18.90 an hour, you chuck a UBI on top, everybody's earning the living wage. And at the same time, we're holding house prices flat.
So sort of a win-win in summary. Cool. Thank you for all of your questions, and thank you for any of you, if you have stayed through this entire presentation tonight. We know that talking about tax is not fun. We know talking about different approaches to the welfare system is not a fun time, but it is crucially important that people do try their best to understand what options are actually available for you this year. And how you're going to decide what you prefer is just going to be purely based on your own priorities. And all we can ask is that you understand your options. So I hope we've helped a little bit with that tonight. Matthew, thank you so much, as always. You're genius. You know this area so well, and I know you've been absolutely pouring through the green policy over the last few days, even since you were up at my house. So thank you so much for all your work on this.
No worries at all, Shai.
And thank you to Adam and Kane for sorting out all our technology, and to everyone at home, thank you so very much for joining us. Take care out there. Talk to you soon.